Okay, in this video I'm going to try to talk through some understanding of the error coding system in EDC ECU files. I'm using the SAT Layout 1.9105 brake horsepower EDC16 file that I've used for all the previous videos. Now what I've got in front of me, and the pink is just to make life simple when I want to search for it, because I didn't want to spend ages rummaging through the file to this point. So obviously if you're looking at another file you're not going to see pink. What I've got in front of me is the fault class table. Now the giveaway for this is these little peaks, and once you've looked at a few files you'll recognise them straight away. Believe me, they are fairly easy to find. Now you don't need to be able to find these, but it's a good guide to put you in the right area for looking for fault codes. Now in EDC15 ECUs, the fault codes and all the information associated with the fault codes is in one big lump, so you can generally find quite a lot of the information associated with each fault code next to the fault code. Now that doesn't happen in EDC16s, so this information about the fault classes, this applies to every fault code. So in other words, if you find a fault code, it will have a number, and that number will refer to one of these classes. So straight away you've got a problem, because how do you know you've got the number? And even if you know that you've got the number for a fault class, how do you know which one of these is the one that you're looking for? So it immediately becomes far more complicated than you think. Now this is followed by a section here. Now I won't go into what that is at the moment, because if I go into too many bits and pieces here, this is going to just get more and more and more complicated. But basically you get a little section of humps and bumps like this, and then with a little bit of luck it stops. In other words, you get some blank spaces, but whether you do or whether you don't, it's quite variable from file to file, so you can't always be sure. And sometimes they're not huge bumps like this, they're smaller little bumps in the file, but generally speaking there is an obvious set of coding followed by either a blank space or very low values down here. But where you need to be here on this file is very, very difficult to tell, when I've left myself, as you can see, various markers on here just to remind myself, because otherwise I would have been saying to you, oh, this might be where I need to be, or this might be, or that might be, so it gets quite complicated. Now if I go forwards, you'll see that a lot of these values stay fairly low. And again, ignore the pink markers, they are there for a reason, and I'll explain later. And then suddenly the values jump up. Now from here, where they jump up, back to somewhere over here, they're all fairly low, and that whole area is filled with OBD codes. In other words, it's filled with what are known as carb codes, and most people call them P codes. So these along here, all these relatively small little bumps, are the P codes, they're the P error codes. Now sometimes in a file these taller blips of data will be mixed in with these smaller bits, and so this will be one great big block with little bits and big bits all mished in together. So they're all mashed together, and so it won't look like this. But on this one we've got a whole block which is P codes. Right, now this is followed by another block, obviously, look, but they're bigger. And that block, up to this point where it suddenly crashes down, that is manufacturer specific codes. So in other words, they will be VW codes or Audi codes or Skoda codes, or in this case SEAT codes. The VAG as a group tend to use the same codes for all of their vehicles, so they will just be VAG codes in that sense. Now what this means is that these will usually be 5-figure numbers in decimal, and the P codes will usually be 4-figure numbers in hexadecimal. Now if life was that simple, and it often is in some of the earlier EDC16s, then you're not too bad off. But what often happens, and has happened in this sat layout file, is that these numbers include various other numbers and bits of information which tend to confuse the situation. Right, following on from our manufacturer codes, there is a little bit of coding where you can see definite spikes in the coding. And then it suddenly goes almost flat, but with these little bumps on it. And if I go forward, you'll see there's a lot of these. And there's another great big set of there. But these are fairly distinct from those, aren't they? Because those have suddenly gone fairly regular and fairly low, whereas these are a little bit higher, a lot less than that, and they're fairly irregular, so they jump about all over the place. Now what we've got here is basically a class table for the fault paths. So if you've watched the EDC15 videos, you should know by now that there will be 8 faults or 8 errors that feed into a fault path. So we've got 8 errors feeding into a fault path, and here's all the different paths. So loads of paths over here, loads of errors. Now one of the things that you'll get used to if you look into this is that this block here is actually the exact same size as this block, the manufacturer specific codes. Looks a lot different in size, I'll admit, because it comes all the way up to here, but that pink block is exactly the same size as that block. And it is also exactly the same size as this block, which runs from here all the way up to here somewhere. And the reason they're the same size is because there are 4 possible sites here for codes. So for a particular code, so a particular block of codes, there's 4 possibilities here, and there are 4 possibilities in here. So that's 4 P codes and 4 manufacturer specific codes, which gives us 8 codes, and those 8 codes feed into this pink block, which is the same size as those big blocks. Now, how is that possible? Well, of course, the way it's possible is because the 2 previous blocks are 16-bit, and this block, although I'm still looking at it in 16-bit, is actually 8-bit. So if I change to 8-bit, it's just still there, and it still looks roughly the same size, but there's a lot more data in there. Now, changing to 8-bit has one advantage at this point, because there's the manufacturer's codes, there's all the little codes that were tiny little numbers down here earlier, and here's the block that we are looking for. Right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop there and come back, because if I do all of this in one go, your head will explode. I can tell you, it was not fun to try and get through this in one go.